Hey everyone, my name's Brian Cronin. I'm going to talk about Nortel networks for my presentation. Definitely enjoyed reading up on this topic and this business. I learned a lot about both Canadian history and business, and also United States telecommunications history. So, interesting topic, and I look forward to sharing what I learned here. So, a brief history of Nortel was founded in 1895 as Northern Electric Company based out of Canada. But in reality, Northern Electric was actually a subsidiary of AT&T. So obviously AT&T is a US based business, and in order for them to move effectively into the Canadian market at the best cost, creating a subsidiary helped them do that. So they started in 1895 all the way up until 1956. At this point, essentially the U.S. government, because AT&T was a monopoly at the time, um, essentially made them break up the company. So they let the subsidiary go, and Northern Electric became its own business at the time. The main product for Northern Electric moving forward were these digital switches, basically just a faster way to communicate through telephone. And a lot of other larger companies like AT&T didn't necessarily want to invest in this technology because of the infrastructure they already had in place with the old technology. So this is a way for Northern Electric to essentially start gaining market share with new technology, better technology, and make a name for itself. So moving into the 1970s, this is when Northern Telecom went public on the Toronto Stock Exchange and then also on the New York Stock Exchange later in the 1970s. They actually became Canada's largest company ever at the time after the acquisition of Bay Networks. So Bay Networks was a data networking or IP technology company. So obviously we all know what IP is used for as far as phones, computers, so it was a very significant acquisition for, at the time, $9.1 billion. So from a market capitalization standpoint, shortly after that, they became Canada's largest ever company. This was also the time that they changed their name to Nortel Networks. So after the acquisition of Bay Networks, the company really had to make a decision to kind of stay the path on their current telecommunication products or to move into the internet, which was just starting to be talked about at the time, right? And they made a huge strategic mistake in staying on the current path compared to investing in internet technology. So really, at that point, they started to acquire internet providers, mostly startups, to try and compete. But in reality, it was just too late. Um, the company started to incur significant losses in the late 1990s into the early 2000s, and even though that was the case, the company's stock price continued to climb, mostly just due to speculation that they would eventually make it in the internet space. Then obviously we all know, due to the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s, the stock collapses. And this really caused great harm to Canada just because of the amount of money that was invested in this company. It actually at the time made up a third of the totality of the Toronto Stock Exchange. So you can imagine a large portion of Canadian citizens were invested in some way, shape, or form in Nortel at that time, just based on the amount of valuation on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So it definitely hurt a lot of people. And again, this wasn't necessarily due to accounting scandal at the time. So moving into the accounting scandal after the dot-com bubble, the company went through a large restructure. They essentially laid off two-thirds of its workforce. They continued to lose money. And then to everyone's surprise, in I believe the first quarter of 2003, they showed a profit for the first time. So as far as the accounting scandal goes, it really wasn't sophisticated or hard to catch on to. So they were essentially just moving revenues from year to year and removing liabilities. And this helped the executives reach bonus goals essentially from 1998 up until 2003 when they were caught. And really, their external auditors caught on to him during that year and essentially let the authorities know. And that was really the end of it. So post accounting scandal, that was really signified the death of the company, if you will, just from the technology that wasn't really usable or competitive anymore. Then you add the accounting scandal on top of it. Um, the company would go bankrupt, and then by 2009, no longer exists. So I wish the accounting scandal was more sophisticated, but I can't say it was. Then briefly, just talking a little bit more about the aftermath of Nortel failing. So I already briefly touched on it, how large Nortel's stock was just on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So, like I said, it made up a third of the total valuation of the Toronto Stock Exchange. So, once it collapsed for good, it really was a significant blow to Canadian citizens, their economy, and then after the 2003 scandal broke, shares essentially crashed again because people briefly started investing. At this point, they finally laid off the top three executives. And then, of course, where it seems like the majority of these scandals, the actual executives got to keep their bonuses, and they were all acquitted of any charges, which was surprising. But I guess not really. So in the end, I think it was by 2009, the company was bankrupt and ceased to exist. So again, I enjoyed um, looking into this and enjoyed sharing it with you guys.